Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Salty Dog webinar. My name is Alex Helfand, coordinator of education for the Salty Dogs. And tonight, we're really happy to have back with us one of our really great sponsors from David Walters Yachts. Josh McLean is going to be talking to us tonight about offshore boats for passage making. And as we've done in the past, please put your questions in the chat box. And as Josh reminded me, if it's really relevant to the topic we're talking about at the moment, we'll try to answer it then. If not, we'll do it at the end, but we will get to everyone's questions. And with that, I will stop talking and disappear from the screen and turn it over to Josh.
All right. Thank you, Alex, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to come and speak to the Salty Dogs once again. My name is Josh McLean. That's my, let me see if I can get the, let's see, that's me right there. It's my smiling face. I'm the president of David Walters Yachts. We are certainly very proud to be sponsors of the Salty Dog Sailing Association. I've said it, I think at just about every opportunity I've had to get in front of the dogs that, you guys truly are the core audience for Dave Walters Yachts. We love the organization and what you do and the sense of community that you build around it all. Fantastic organization, and we strive to take the opportunity to share more information about the Salty Dog Sailing Association to our customers every opportunity we get, because you guys are truly out there doing it and living the life that everyone that we speak with eyes with envy. So great to be back in front of the Salty Dogs. As Alex had mentioned, we're going to be doing one of our webinars here this afternoon, or I guess evening, depending on where you are. I'm in Annapolis, Maryland, not too far from Alex here. You're just down the road. The topic for today is going to be offshore boats for passage making. We're going to talk a little bit about what makes for a blue water boat, what is a blue water boat, some key characteristics to look for, and just a general discussion of what the blue water boat really means to a lot of folks. This is going to be kind of a broad conversation. I could probably spend an hour and a half on every one of the slides that I'll pull up here. But if anybody has any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. The way I like to kind of run these webinars is if there's a question that comes up that's kind of relevant to where we are in the discussion, we'll take the time and we'll go down a couple of tangents here, and then we'll get back on course. And if there's anything that's more appropriate to be left towards the end, I'll certainly touch on it at that point. One of the things that I really like to do when we kick off these webinars is just kind of get an understanding for the audience, who's out there. I see a couple of familiar faces. Michael, always good to see you. I know what boat Michael owns, beautiful new Hylas 57, but I'd love to know what other boats we have in the audience here. Just kind of helps me maybe speak to a couple of examples or just get a little bit more context in terms of who I'm talking to. So don't be shy, drop your name and the boat you own in the chat box there. And I just like to get a pull of the audience. So, all right. So we're going to be talking about, like I said, offshore boats for passage making. Sort of the characteristics and qualities of the right boat. We're going to go into a little bit about, in my eyes, and sort of a hot topic conversation. It's certainly one that's batted around quite a bit, of what is a blue water boat, and what are the, whether you're in the market for it. I got a slide in here that's kind of geared towards if you're considering getting into a blue water boat, kind of helping you steer the conversation in terms of your requirements. We're going to talk a little bit about, do you need a blue water boat? That's one of the things I get rather frequently from folks that we work with who are looking to purchase a boat. You don't always need what we would deem to be a blue water boat to go off and do what most folks are going to go venture towards with the boats that they either own or eyeing. We'll talk a little bit about key qualities and characteristics, and you can also take some of these characteristics and because we're going to kind of focus on blue water boats, you might, whether you own a production boat or something that may not traditionally be characterized as blue water, there are certain elements here that you can adapt or add to your boat to make it more suitable for going offshore. So though the conversation is certainly focused on the design and core characteristics of a blue water boat, you may be able to take some insights into what really makes a boat suitable for passage making and apply that into maybe the boat that you have today. And then throughout this, I'm going to speckle in a couple of insights in terms of some of my favorite boats and why they are popular for passage making and often sought after for folks looking to certainly travel some distances. All right, so we got a couple of looks like a couple catamarans in the audience. Great. Keep them coming. I'd love to know what you guys got. All right, so again, my name is Josh McLean. There's my contact information. I'm sure you can find me at a boat show or on the internet or somewhere. But if you're curious, jot down my number there. I always welcome your questions. So if there's anything I talk about today that you want to follow up with or exchange information, I'm always happy to be a resource. So I welcome anybody to reach out to me at any time and just chat boats. So always happy to do so. All right, so let's kind of kick the conversation off with what is a blue water sailboat. I kind of had an interesting interaction with a few of my colleagues some time back. I found myself on a Hylas 70 after a photo shoot here in Annapolis. After dinner and a couple glasses of wine, I had with me Peter Grimm from North Sails. I had Bobby Noyce, one of the best surveyors I know, Tarn Kelsey, half a dozen of my brokers, and my good friend Billy Black was there as well. And somehow between a couple of bottles of red wine, we really got onto the subject of how would you define what a blue water boat is? And it's definitely a term and a definition that's thrown around in a variety of different ways, whether it's a marketing brochure for the newest sailboat that comes to market, or just batted back and forth between sailors at a bar. Everyone's talking about what makes a boat capable for offshore. So you could probably ask a dozen different people and get a dozen different answers. But in a very broad sense, while pouring through a couple bottles of wine and deep in conversation, we kind of boiled it down to a few key characteristics: seaworthiness, durability, self-sufficiency, and safety. Took us a few bottles to get to those four core characteristics, and we're going to dive a little bit more into that. We get a little further into the webinar here, but more broadly, it's a sailboat specifically designed and built to handle extended ocean voyages in the demanding conditions of open seas. All right. When I start working with somebody who's going to be, really looking to get out and cross oceans or, voyage any distance at sea, we kind of always start with, bringing it back to your core requirements, because that's kind of where you're going to start the conversation. Because though the characteristics of a blue water boat can be very broad in the spectrum, it can be equally as broad in terms of the size and the capabilities of these boats as well. Many folks would cross an ocean in a Pacific Seacraft 37, but probably wouldn't be the best boat recommended for a family of 8. So similarly, a Hylas 70 isn't going to be necessarily the ideal choice for a cruising couple. So, when I first start talking to folks about, what's going to be best suited for them, we kind of boil it down to a few key topics of conversation here. Size of the crew, that's really going to be dependent on who the capable sailors are on the crew, who's going to be primarily in charge of, maintaining watch, actually operating the boat. I know a lot of families get involved in making passages here. So you really got to kind of determine, what the core crew is going to be, making sure that a boat's going to be suitable to be operated safely and sufficiently by the number of hands on deck. Many of the blue water boats that folks are going to be cruising today are really designed around the cruising couple. I suspect that's probably the case for most of the salty dogs out there. I know there's a good number of families as well that are participating, but predominantly, the folks that I certainly work with and that I encounter out there cruising are a husband and wife couple. So most of the boats that we're going to see out there in many of these rallies, or many of the boats that we certainly sell, are really geared towards being able to be operated safely by two people. Obviously, the crew size is going to determine the number of cabin requirements, how many butts can sit in a cockpit comfortably, how many heads, size of the galley, amount of storage that you require, and so forth. So for a cruising couple, two people and maybe the occasional two additional guests on board, really a popular size is going to be in that sort of mid 40s to 50-foot size range. You've seen a lot of what we would typically call blue water boats, or manufacturers thereof, really put a focus on boats that are in that mid 40 to 50-foot size range. Hylas has their 46 and their 49. Hellberg Rossi's more popular boats have been the 42, the 43, the 48. Oyster's got their 495. These are all, put a couple oriented cruising boats. Similarly with, boats like Island Packet and Tartan, their core boats are right in that mid 40 size range, set up for the cruising couple. Another consideration in terms of the right boat is going to be, obviously the size and dimensional limitations. For going offshore and passage making, certainly a deeper draft is going to be advantageous. But know that there are some very capable boats out there that do have a shallower shoal draft keel that have extra ballast loaded up. Many of the more popular cruising boats out there today that you're going to encounter are going to have shoal draft or shield keels. The length overall restrictions, obviously the home port, knowing where the boat's going to be, you're going to be limited by how much boat you can put in the marina of your choice. Mooring fields and such, generally boats under 50 feet are going to be you're going to have probably greater options in terms of mooring fields and marinas. And there's a lot of very capable boats that, like I said, fit into that size range. We're going to get into a little bit talking about, rig heights, rig designs and such, when we get into a little bit more of a conversation about the characteristics of these boats. But I know a lot of folks are going up and down the ICW, or at least tucking in from time to time. So 63.5 and under is probably the ideal. A lot of boats are going to fit into that sort of size range. This is actually a slide I stole from a prior webinar here. So this next bullet probably isn't going to be too relevant. But the, necessary degree of quality. Most of the boats that we're going to talk about in terms of being blue water or offshore capable are going to fall into the semi-custom range. There are a number of sort of higher caliber production manufacturers out there. Tartan being one. Sabre, though they're no longer making sailboats, is also a very capable offshore boat. Island Packet, that's a boat that you're certainly going to see, making some distance. And a lot of custom boats as well. Pardon me, I'm just getting over a cold. Budget, that's not going to be too relevant for this conversation here. All right, so one of the first questions that I kind of get into folks when we're kind of talking about the various, boats that they might be identifying to make passage in is really just asking them quite honestly if they really even need what they would call a blue water boat. Most of the cruising that 90% of sailors are doing is more coastal cruising, or even just bordering on offshore. The passage from Florida to the Bahamas, though you're crossing the Gulf Stream there, it's not exactly the most daunting passage with the right conditions. So more times than not, most folks are only going to be spending about 5% of their time really in offshore conditions. So, you know, if you're tuning into this webinar with the intent of maybe purchasing a boat for going offshore or voyaging any distance, you know, you may find that your normal use case for the boat isn't necessarily going to be best suited for, you know, blue water voyaging. You may find yourself doing more day sailing and coastal cruising. So truth is, most sailors don't really need a blue water boat. You know, but when you put a lot of value on seaworthiness, durability, self-sufficiency, and safety, you know, there's a lot of production boats that do actually kind of dabble, you know, in those characteristics. So some qualities of a blue water boat, you know, generally stout construction, sea kindly design, and systems designed for self-sufficiency. When we're talking about blue water boats for passage making, you know, a lot of the conversation stems around hull design and the stability. A sea kindly hull, you can see this when you're going around through many of the boat yards. Blessed up here in Annapolis, you've got several big boat yards. If you just walk around through Jabins, you'll see the various boats up on the hard. We've got a lot of production boats, which are going to tend to have flatter hull shapes and flatter forefoots on the hull profile. Most blue water boats are going to have a bit of a moderate to heavy displacement hull form, which is going to allow for a more comfortable motion in larger waves, being less affected by rough seas. I said it before, but deeper draft is going to be a bit more of a advantage when you're obviously being offshore in heavier seas and open water. A keel with more significant balance is going to help just keep the boat upright and lessen the heeling motion. I'm always partial to a skeg or a partial skeg rudder, just offering greater protection for the rudder. Construction and durability. More of the more popular blue water boats out there, if you look at the actual way that the fiberglass is laid up, they're going to be more of a solid hull construction. Generally, they're going to be fiberglass, but a lot of, you know, even some of the more French-built aluminum hull boats are becoming popular. Whether they're built with a core or without a core, you know, the hulls tend to be more thick, stiff, and robust than your typical production boats. If you've ever done or replaced like a transducer or installed a new through hull on a production boat and then seen the thickness of what that hull material really looks like, it's notably thinner than a typical sort of semi-custom or solid hull boat. I once changed out a through hull on a Valiant 42, and the deepest part of the fiberglass was about 4.5 inches thick. So, you know, some of these more stout blue water boats are exceptionally thick fiberglass, and again, much more heavier displacement than your typical production boat. Most of these boats that are going to be designed for being offshore are going to have some degree of watertight compartments. In many cases, it's going to be sort of a watertight structural bulkhead up in the bow. This not only increases the buoyancy, but it adds in the safety in case of a hull breach. You know, there's a lot of crud floating around offshore, whether you see it or not. You know, the worst case scenario is take something up through the bow and it floods the living compartments of the boat. But many of the more suitable blue water boats are designed for being offshore are going to have actually a watertight compartment just forward of the forward cabin. Some of them actually have a bit of a check valve between the bulkheads. I know I believe it was the Oyster or the Helber Grassi actually had a check valve into the bilge so that you could actually drain the bow compartment into the bilge and evacuate it with a bilge pump. So maybe check that. But predominantly, most of these offshore boats are going to have some sort of a watertight compartment. The Oysters and the Hylases actually have watertight stern compartments as well. But it's definitely one of the key characteristics. Being offshore, you know, having a proper cockpit design, a cockpit that's safe and secure, that provides the crew with not only access to the sail controls and the winches, but also offers protection from the sea and the wind. A lot of the more production-oriented boats, or the day boats or coastal cruisers, one of the key trend there is the much more broad cockpits, obviously designed more for comfort and entertaining. But when these boats really get heeled over, that can be a bit of a negative when you're sliding across the cockpit with nothing proper to brace up against. So though even more the predominant blue water manufacturers of today are going with larger cockpits, one of the key characteristics is, maintaining good deep center cockpits, high bulwarks, proper seating, big deep benches. If there's a center cockpit table, having a bar to brace yourself against, that's probably one of the bigger, at least, or more apparent differences in a production versus a sort of an offshore boat is really the layout of the cockpit. One being more orientated for entertaining and getting a lot of butts in the cockpit versus really being able to keep you safe, centered, and protected offshore. In addition, a lot of the more offshore-oriented boats are going to have a bit of a bridge deck that's going to prevent any water from entering into the companionway, whether it's in big following seas or you're getting spray over the side of the boat. You definitely want to keep the water out of the interior. So a good characteristic to look for is actually having a bit of a bridge deck, or having a companionway entrance that doesn't necessarily sit flush with the sole of the cockpit. Most boats are gonna, well suited for offshore, gonna have real sturdy handholds. Always 3 points of contact on the boat when moving. Provisions for jack lines connect from the bow to the stern. One of the things that and I speak biasly because we sell quite a few of them, but the Hylases, they've got big, thick stanchions that stand about 33 inches tall. It's like a real solid handrail, the entire length of the boat. That's going to be a little bit less common on more of the day boat or coastal cruising boats. Just having handholds and big, thick stanchions, tall lifelines. Never go with coated lifelines. When you put that sort of a PVC coating or that plastic rubberized coating over a lifeline, you can never really tell if you're getting corrosion inside of the lifeline itself. So you'll find over time that water gets trapped in there, and it can actually cause rusting and eventual degradation of the actual metal that makes up that lifeline. And before you know it, you can go to grab it one day and it turns out that lifeline failed. So yeah, never coated lifelines. More boats oriented for being offshore or traveling distance are going to have robust ground tackle. So good anchoring system is obviously vital. Most of you guys probably have some at least certainly primary and secondary anchors on board. Good suitable high capacity windlasses, quality chain. Always inspect your chain before you head out. And good reliable anchors. I'm a Rockna guy myself. I think everyone's got a bit of their preference. One of the biggest differences really between what is going to be more of a coastal cruising boat, day boats, or many of the production boats versus something more suited for offshore is going to be having an abundance of storage and certainly lots of tankage. So you're going to be spending quite a bit of time on these boats, whether it's, making a passage or living aboard once you get to your destination. So having the provisions for spare tools, equipment, safety equipment, as we'll touch on here at the bottom of the slide, and really spending just extended time on the boat. Storage becomes a premium. It always amazes me when you go to a lot of these boat shows and you step aboard some of these new models and they look fantastic, like a high-end New York condo. But then you start opening cupboards and cabinets, despite the fact the signs will tell you not to. If you open up some of these cabinets, you'll find you can hardly put a teacup in some of these cabinets in these galleys. More and more these days, many of these production boats are just being built with, just teeny tiny storage compartments. I was on I think it was a 45-foot Beneteau a few days ago, and I counted 2 hanging lockers on the entire boat. Certainly having the provision to be able to carry tools and spare parts and a good inventory of them, because, being able to be self-sufficient is important. You're going to find that you'll be filling up these cabinets pretty quick. Obviously, the advantage of large water and fuel tanks. More boats built for traveling any distance are going to have much larger fuel tanks and water tanks than your average coastal cruiser or production boat. Obviously, with the advantage of water makers, you can always, make more water. You can't necessarily make more diesel. So, given the option, I'd certainly favor having more fuel than water. But just like anything on a boat, it can fail. So you want to make sure that you've got suitable water tanks to be able to at least accommodate the requirements for the crew for your intended voyage or length of your passage. And keep in mind that, like I said, water makers can certainly fail. A good offshore boat, is going to be certainly well suited with sea berths. Most of you are probably familiar with sea berth. It's a narrow berth, keeps you secure while sleeping in heavier seas. Or at the very least, lee cloths installed in the cabins. My favorite spot is the settee in the main salon while I'm off watch. Keeps you nice and centered in the boat. So if you got a good, comfortable settee, a good lee cloth installed there with some provisions for clipping in, certainly can make a world of difference. But regardless, you're going to want to make sure that your berths are all equipped with lee cloths. The galley is one of the things that kind of gets overlooked oftentimes until you find yourself keeled over and trying to cook a pot of spaghetti. More boats these days are going to have what's, more or less a passageway galley. The advantage there is obviously being able to brace yourself while cooking on either tack in rough conditions. You don't see it too often, but there's a couple of boats that have been aboard where the refrigeration is actually more center line and opens fore and aft. So just whatever tack you're on, you're not losing your your cold goods. I've been on a boat where we could only open the refrigerator on a starboard tack. That gets a little bit obnoxious. I'm actually pretty partial to a U-shaped galley. Hull Grassi, I think, probably does the best galley in terms of what would typically be, blue water boats. U-shaped galley really kind of tucks you in, gives you a lot of counter space, but also doesn't take up too much room on the interior. Good ventilation. It's obviously essential for, not only providing, the obvious natural breezes, but also keeping the boat dry when you want to keep things dry, but also having the ability to keep the water out when the seas kick up. So a good blue water boat, more times than not, are going to have dorade vents that are going to have sort of a dorade box here, so it allows the air to come in but keeps the water out. Anybody who's ever been in heavy seas knows that's not exactly a foolproof system. So a good dorade system should have a cap that can be installed while offshores, and the vents themselves can be brought aft, so you're not catching waves over the bow that are spilling into your dorade boxes. But high quality port lights and hatches that are able to be dogged down and sealed. I found that manship hatches tend to offer the best dogs, and really they're the most serviceable in terms of my experience. From what I've seen, you're able to replace the seals and service them probably better than most. Though Lumars are also, pretty easy to service. You can pop out the gaskets. Takes maybe an hour or two per hatch, but they can certainly be done. But definitely want to check your hatches and your seals on your port lights and your hatches before you go venturing offshore. Safety features, this kind of goes without mention, but making sure you've got good, strong lifelines and stanchions. Obviously, keep the crew on board, but also provides a valuable handhold when things kick up. Any boat that's going to be heading offshore should have a life raft and an EPIRB that's kept up current and well serviced, but also accessible. And I think that's something that is often overlooked. I've been aboard boats where you step on board and the life raft is tucked under a settee or buried in the bottom of a sail locker. or even worse, nobody knows where it's at. So, a good characteristic for being offshore is going to be able to have that life raft readily accessible. I always prefer to have it on deck or in a dedicated locker at the aft deck. You'll find a lot of the valises are being able to be incorporated into the stern rail. That's always a big benefit. So you always want to step up into your life raft. But you certainly want to have it accessible when you need it. EPIRBs, PLBs, that kind of goes without saying. I think most people, know that you want an EPIRB for the boat and PLB for the individual. Have a dedicated ditch bag prepared with all the essentials just in case. And again, this kind of ties back into storage. You've got to be able to have the provisions on the boat to be able to keep all this gear well organized. This is kind of this is where you could take, perhaps a higher end production boat, or, even your typical production boat, and add a bit of, add some characteristics that are going to make your boat, I guess, better for being able to make passages. So the systems, the redundancy, you can add systems, you can add redundancy into most boats, but certainly if you're going to be making passage, you're going to want to have a good, reliable autopilot. It's going to be vital for short-handed sailing. As I mentioned, I imagine most folks in the audience are probably going to be a cruising couple or a family. So being able to make sure that the boat has got a good, reliable autopilot, that's going to be invaluable for avoiding crew fatigue. Anybody who's had an autopilot fail out on them halfway through a passage knows that's not exactly the most pleasant experience. Nothing like hand steering for 1,000 miles. Multiple GPSs and navigation tools. With the advent of the way that most of these chart plotters can now integrate with your iPads and Navionics and Starlink that can stream Netflix in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there is, probably a dozen different ways that you can pull up a GPS location or a chart now from your boat. And it's not just a chart plotter; it's now your phone, it's your tablet. I think these days most folks probably have more ways to navigate than they even realize. Let's see. All right, question on the reefing systems. We're going to get to that one next. How often are boats outfitted with redundant autopilots? If you're not, I'd say your average boat's not going to have necessarily two independent autopilots. You may have you may have a backup ram. You may have, this may be part of your spare parts inventory. If you got like a typical hydraulic system, or hydraulic ram, you may have a spare ram. You may have a spare fluxgate compass. If you got more of like the Mamba steering system, which is the motor that ties into the direct drive, carrying a spare autopilot motor. But yeah, you can set these boats up with some redundant autopilots. I've certainly seen a few that literally have two systems set up, one just disconnected. Most of the systems built today are, if they're properly sized for the boat, are pretty reliable. So I think it's probably becoming less and less common to find some of the newer boats equipped with literally redundant autopilots. But I'd certainly encourage you to keep spare parts so that you could replace your more critical components should something fail. All right, water makers, we'd mentioned tankage. So make sure that you've got a properly sized water maker to be able to keep up with the crew requirements. Water makers now, there's even some really good portable water makers. Rain Man makes a really cool system that I've seen folks use who may not have it in the budget to install a dedicated system on the boat. Water maker is definitely going to be critical equipment when you're going to be offshore. Even 250 gallons of water you'll go through that sooner than you think, even just with a couple of people on board. Reliable communication. So it kind of ties into the GPS and the navigation tools. These days, satellite communication technology has become far more affordable than it was even just a few years back. Whether it's an Iridium Go system, Starlink, or what do they call it? The spot trackers. There's a dozen different systems out here that can be used for satellite communication. No piece of equipment is going to be more critical than a good radio with AIS. Single sideband, I think that's probably becoming fewer and fewer people are being reliant upon a single sideband radio, especially with the advent of some of these satellite communication tools. But if I was going to be speccing out a boat, I'd probably still put a single sideband radio on it today. And all these communication tools are going to obviously enable you to be keeping up with weather updates. There's probably just as many tools out there for weather as there is navigation. So, there's a lot of different tools out there that folks can rely upon for good, reliable weather. Find one that works for you. Everyone's probably got a different answer in terms of which weather tools they prefer, but employ a couple, play around with them, and see which works best for you. Sail plans and rigs. So this is probably one of the more, standout differences between what we would consider to be more of a coastal cruising and a real offshore capable boat. And a lot of it centers around obviously the strength of the rig, the versatility of the sail plan, and how easily it is to manage in a wide variety of conditions. Predominantly, you're going to find that your offshore boats are going to be able to carry multiple sail configurations. Whether it's a cutter rig, catch rig, solent rig, you're going to be able to employ maybe a Genoa or a working jib, a variety of different head sail configurations based on wind conditions and sea states. What's critical in there is being able to balance out your sail plan. So I'm partial to a cutter rig. I like the idea of being able to put a staysail out and a couple of reefs in the main and really bring the sail area center into the boat. Really helps mellow things out. An Amel is a pretty popular boat for being offshore, and when I think Amel, I think catch rigs, especially on some of the maybe not so much some of their newer models, but what we typically know as an Amel. Catch rigs are probably not as common these days, but they had historically been. But offers a lot of versatility, easy to manage sail plans. Solent rigs, of course, Michael's probably very partial to his. I've seen his Hylas 57 out there with a full sail plan up, flying the big Genoa, or just simply using the working jib. Solent rig offers a lot of versatility. Reefing systems, that's one that comes up quite a bit. I just had this conversation with a gentleman I was working with. We're actually out shopping for a blue water boat for him at the moment. I took him aboard a boat that had a Park Avenue boom, a leisure furl, in-boom furling, and we had a traditional in-mast furling system. Pros and cons to both. I'm very partial to, especially if I'm going to be out sailing with my wife, I like to, make sure that safety is foremost. I always like the idea of being able to put a sail on deck with a halyard. So for that reason, I'm quite partial to a Park Avenue boom or a leisure furl system. I just generally like the idea of being able to bring a sail on deck with a halyard. But then again, there's a lot of advantages to in-mast furling systems, which are probably going to be more prevalent on a lot of the boats that you'll see today. You can, obviously reef the main in a wider variety of wind conditions. You can hold off on reefing a a little bit longer than you could with certainly traditional slab reefing, as well as a leisure furl. So, you know, I think a lot of it, when it comes down to the various reefing systems, I think it's going to be a variety of factors. I know one of the reasons why the client I'm working with now will not go with a slab reefing system or a leisure furl system is they have some issues, you know, actually with their upper body strength above their shoulders, and with either a in boom or a traditional slab reefing, you're going to have to do a little bit of monkey business to get up and tie into the halyard at the sail every time you raise and lower it. So, so your mobility, if you're going to go with a in boom or slab reefing, you've got to be able to get up, actually, you know, connect the halyard onto the boom, or I'm sorry, on the sail. For them, that was a disqualifying factor because they wanted the the ease of just pushing a button and having the sail stow away nicely in the main or the mast. You know, there is no right or wrong answer in terms of which reefing system is better. Each one has its pros and cons, and like I said, we could have a whole conversation on the pros and cons of each. I would say if you're getting ready to maybe make a purchase on a boat or change up the rig on your boat, I would probably get some time on the water with whatever system that you might be considering first, so you can experience those pros and cons. You know, I'm either a traditional slab reefing kind of guy or an in-mast for its simplicity. Similarly, sails. So most of the time on your offshore boats, you're going to have more durable sails. You know, there's a lot of advances in sail material technology that's you know, made sails a bit stiffer, a bit more resilient. You know, but with those, many of the materials have become more sensitive to UV degradation. So keeping up with your sail protection, your sail covers, is becoming more and more vital with as these sail technologies evolve. But just in general, you know, your sails for an offshore boat are just going to be a bit of a more heavy duty, durable material than you know, maybe your typical coastal cruising boat or your standard Dacron sails. Additional considerations, you know, for a good offshore boat, making sure that systems are accessible and easy to maintain. You know, if you're 1,000 miles offshore, you know, and you need to change out a bilge pump, it's important that you know how to get to it. Same thing with through hulls, you know, impellers on the engine. All these systems, you need to be able to know where they are and how to service them. So it's important that you not only look at, you know, how feasible it is to service these systems when offshore, but also having some practice before you do get underway to make sure that you're familiar with how they operate and how they're serviced. Protection from the elements, Dodger, Bimini. This kind of ties into the cockpit conversation, where a key characteristic for a good offshore boat is that you're able to stay protected from the wind, from the sea, from the sun, certainly. You know, a good Dodger and a good Bimini, awnings, sunshades, enclosure, isinglass enclosure. I mean, that's all critical. A lot of the, you know, more day cruiser or coastal cruising boats, you know, the Biminis are rather thin. It's usually fairly stock or factory canvas. You know, if you take a look at the enclosure on some of these more offshore capable boats, you know, the enclosures themselves are pretty robust. You know, crew fatigue is probably one of the more important elements when you're really making a passage. And it's quite easy to get fatigued when you're exposed to the elements. So a good protected cockpit is definitely critical. Yeah, you know, I just saw a comment there about the basically the unlimited reef points. Yeah, Yeah, with the in-mast furling, or like you said, with the in-boom furling, mainsail. Yeah, 6 reef points. Yeah, easy to drop on deck. All right. Yeah, it's been my pleasure to kind of talk to you guys today. Again, my name's Josh McLean with Dave Walters Yachts. What we covered, we talked a little bit about kind of the broad definition of what a blue water or a offshore boat is. We had dove into a little bit about kind of identifying requirements. Do you really need a blue water boat? You know, like I said, most folks are only going to spend about 5% of their time in open water. The other 90% of the time is going to be on a mooring ball with a cocktail in your hand. So, you know, before you take the plunge and really spend the money on a boat that's purposefully built for offshore voyaging, really ask yourself if that's really a necessity, or if you can make the boat you have better suited for making those passages based on some of the requirements or key characteristics that we discussed. We talked a little bit about some of the qualities and the characteristics, some of the systems that are essential for being offshore, some of the design elements, and the various other considerations of what makes a boat well suited for making offshore passage. So again, yep, my name's Josh. I apologize. I'm kicking a bit of a cold, so I'm getting a little hoarse here. But I appreciate you guys tuning in. And if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. Did you sort of cover your favorite boats, or did you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I've actually got, I was wondering how long I'd get in time. I looked down and I said, wow, I've already been yammering for 50 minutes. But yeah, I'd love to get into that a little bit if you'll let me keep yammering on.
If there are no other questions at this point, then absolutely.
Okay.
Kind of, I know I'm curious, but yeah. And then if anyone thinks of any other questions while we're talking, while you're talking, then we'll get to them.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So let me, I'm going to go ahead and I've seen that. I'm going to stop sharing. And if it's all right by you, Alex, I'm going to stop sharing. I'll just bring up the video here.
That's fine.
Okay. There we go. Let's see here. And that. There we go. All right. Hey, guys. So yeah, this is actually kind of one of the more fun parts about what I do is I get to tell people about the boats that I like. So Dave Walters Yachts is, you know, predominantly known for selling and representing, you know, blue water offshore boats, much like I just described. And the fun part of what I do is I get to work with folks who come in from the very beginning to help work with me to kind of identify what boat's going to be best suited for them. So in the 7 years I've been doing this, I've kind of built my own list of the boats that I think are probably higher on my list in terms of the boats that if I was looking to go offshore that I'd want to do it in. So I would say the top boat on my list, and Michael, I know you're gonna like this, is the Hylas 49. The Hylas 49, in my opinion, has one of the prettiest shear lines to it. Has one of the best hull forms in terms of still maintaining a traditional hull form, meaning it's you know, a bit of a canoe hull shape. Makes it very sea kindly when in a variety of sea states. It's a fast boat nonetheless. It's a you know, moderate displacement boat, but it still carries a lot of sail area, so it's a fast boat. I think the Hylas 49 can keep pace with boats you know, even a few feet larger. One of the other reasons I'm very partial to the Hylas 49 is I think it's got one of the best layouts down below that I've seen on a lot of offshore boats. It's a 3-cabin boat, which it packs a lot of space in a 49-foot hull, especially a hull that is a little bit more traditional in sense. Doesn't have a lot of ups and downs through the interior. You know, you got to step up and down from the galley into the main salon, and then you've got one going forward into the forward cabins, but it's not drastic. So I'd like to minimize tripping hazards. You know, anytime I'm talking about an offshore boat, As many steps as you can minimize up and down, the better. It's also got a really well balanced cutter rig. I think the sail plan on the Hylas 49 is it's just about that sweet spot. You can really balance it in with the staysail. It's got a nice, powerful main. Everything's set up so it's ergonomic right from the helm station, easy access to your primary and secondaries. And the cockpit size is it's perfect for 2 people, and it's well suited for a small group of 4 or 5 hanging out comfortably in the cockpit. If I was picking up a boat to go sail around the world right now, I think the Hylas 49 would be top of my list. Those boats are going to generally be $400,000 or more. And if you don't have that kind of coin laying around, the next best thing would be a Stevens 47. It's the predecessor to the Hylas 49 with some slight variations, but it's really the same hull design. So a lot of the same characteristics that make the Hylas 49 such a great offshore boat can be found in the Stevens 47. So a question just came in. It's on catamarans versus monohulls. One of my favorite offshore catamarans is the Royal Cape. They're South African built. It's definitely a semi-custom boat. It's a very small production batch every year. They only build 2 or 3 boats a year. What I think makes for a good offshore catamaran is you want a catamaran where the deck isn't so low slung. You don't want to get a lot of slapping underneath the hull as the boat kind of traverses through the seas. The Royal Capes tend to have some fairly broad hulls. Each hull is a little bit more rounded, so they don't slam as much as your typical production cat might. Their interiors are also pretty well organized in terms of they've got U-shaped galleys, so you're still pretty heeled. You're pretty tucked in, good utilization of space. They've got a lot of buoyancy in the hull, and I think their rig plan is really robust. So if I was going to be looking at an offshore catamaran, I'd pay a lot of attention to Royal Capes. One of the other boats that I'm really partial to is the Helbergrassi 53. I like Helbergrassis in general, but the 53 I think really sticks out to me. It's a pretty popular size for a couple that also, or a family that wants to have a couple extra guests. 3-cabin boat. Actually they do make a 4-cabin as well. But one of the reasons I like the 53, it's a really traditional Freres design, not too dissimilar from like the Hylas 54. It's still got a bit of a more traditional canoe style hull to it, so it doesn't have as broad of a transom as many of the more modern boats today. The interior is all on one plane, so there is no ups and downs throughout the entire interior. From stem to stern, it's all on the same plane. I think Helbergrassis in general are phenomenal offshore boats. They tend to take a little bit more of a conservative approach to design than most manufacturers, which is pretty true of their Scandinavian nature. When you look at a Helbergrassi, it's not overly styled or over the top like you might think an oyster would be. They definitely put a lot of emphasis on form and function as opposed to sort of aesthetics. They're still pretty boats, but they really focus on the utility. I think a Helbergrassi's also got probably one of the best engine compartments. It's a true walk-in engine compartment where all the systems are accessible. I think probably the Helbergrassi Helbergrassi 53. And if you're looking for something a little smaller, I think the Helbergrassi 43 is equally attractive for somebody that's more focused on something in the mid 40s. If you're really looking for something that's going to be a little bit more utilitarian, maybe budget friendly, I'd probably be looking at like a Valiant 42. The Valiant 42 is a bit more like the SUV of the seas. It is a rock solid offshore boat, solid fiberglass hull. It's actually insulated on the upper portions above the waterline. It's got one of the best rig plans out there for versatility. It's a really well balanced boat. The cockpit, it's more of an aft cockpit boat, so you get a really nice interior on a 42-foot boat. You've got a nice big forward cabin, and then you've got a quarter berth aft. One of the big advantages of the Valiant is the fact that everything that went into a Valiant can come out through the companionway. So everything is super serviceable. It's a boat that you can single hand around the world. Just every system installed on that boat can be touched and serviced. So I think the Valiant's pretty high on my list, but they're definitely getting a little bit more old school than what most folks I think are after these days. And then I think the other boat that I'd put really high on my list would be a Tazwell. I think the Tazwell 44 all season is a really capable boat. It's a pretty budget friendly boat. You can pick a Valiant 40 or a Tazwell 44 up in the mid 200s. I just sold a really nice one in Port Canaveral named Callahan. It's a boat that, though it was made in the early 2000s or even late 90s, aesthetically, it's still a very modern looking boat. It's got a very similar hull form to a Hylas 46. It does have I think it's got a full skeg rudder, which is kind of a big advantage. It's also got a really nice center cockpit with a bit more broad width to it. So you don't feel like you're sitting knee to knee, though it is a 44-foot boat. It's a nice 2-cabin boat, so it's perfect for a couple. Built just down the road from Queen Long Marine, so it actually features a lot of the same, literally the same fixtures as a Hylas, but it's a less expensive boat, but built to the same quality. And it's a Bill Dixon design, and I think Bill Dixon's probably one of the better designers out there even today. So yeah, I think that would probably kind of round out my list of some of my favorite blue water boats. I could go on for days about various boats and different designs. And I'd be happy to do so if anyone wants to give me a call and have a chat afterwards. But yeah, call that Josh's favorite list of blue water boats. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And again, really great job. I don't think we have any other questions. So if that's the case, going once, everyone says thanks, as I do. And I'm going to stop the recording and tune in later on this week, I think, for more. Thanks a lot, Josh.
Yep. Thanks, guys.